The terrifying reality of the consequences of things going wrong in Formula 1 was witnessed by millions around the world during the Bahrain Grand Prix. Romain Grosjean walked away from an enormous, fiery crash with just second-degree burns on his hands and a brief spell in hospital, but it could have been a lot worse. You can learn more about the factors that saved the Haas driver's life in another video that we've made. Here, we're going to focus on the FIA investigation that has already begun, what the wreckage tells us about how the accident escalated so quickly, and the concerns it sparked within the F1 community. What happens now? A full investigation will follow Grosjean's accident like all crashes in major series, with the process expected to take up to 2 months. It was immediately clear that the various FIA safety advances, including the strength of the monocoque, performance of the Halo driver protection device, and integrity of reinforced fireproof racewear, all played vital roles in helping Grosjean withstand the crash itself, and then the flames, and escape to safety. However, as per standard procedure, an in-depth investigation will now follow, with the FIA safety department analysing around 30 serious circuit racing accidents a year. Data collection will be at the heart of the investigation and use various video streams, including the driver-facing 400 frames per second camera, to reveal in slow motion what happened to him during the accident. In-ear accelerometers moulded to fit inside the driver's ear canal will have measured the movement of Grosjean's head in the crash, while the in-car accident data recorder will reveal specific speed and force information. The investigation will include an assessment of competitor safety devices such as the helmet, hands device, safety harness, protective clothing, survival cell, headrest, in-car extinguisher system, and the Halo. Chassis integrity and safety barrier performance will also be analysed to understand the consequences of an impact of that energy, which Haas said was more than 50 times the force of gravity, and the angle of the impact. Medical car driver Alan van der Merwe and medical delegate Dr. Ian Roberts played an initial part in trying to calm the flames and help Grosjean escape, and the role of the track marshals and the medical intervention team will also be looked at. Information will then be added to the FIA's World Accident Database, which enables researchers to study individual accident cases, and when considered collectively, the statistics generated are used to identify frequently occurring risk factors and prioritise research projects. Barrier failure is the chief concern. The failure of the barrier is a key question mark. Sebastian Vettel's concern was matched by other leading F1 personnel, and the priority should be to ascertain whether it's simply unrealistic to expect a barrier to more efficiently withstand such a high-speed, high-force impact, or if something in the design or structure of the barrier was flawed. When the nose of the car hit the Armco barrier, it opened it up and allowed the nose and survival cell to penetrate it. The Armco is, by design, meant to decelerate the crashing vehicle, but to do that it needs to be hit by something with a larger surface area. Formula 1 cars with their structural nose sections and tapered design are like a bullet, and this accident shows that they can penetrate this structure in certain circumstances. The position of the Armco barrier vertical mounting post also played a part in the separation of the front and rear of the car. The damage to the barrier appears to show that the car tried to wrap itself around one of these. A Tech Pro barrier or reinforced railing would have stood up better, but the positioning of these barriers is a judgment call around the circuit, given the expense of installing them. And this is an unusual place for a crash, perhaps the first time the circuit has experienced one of this magnitude there. That barrier is not necessarily expected to be hit, as it's used to guide an entry point to the track for response and recovery vehicles. Vettel gave an impassioned account of why he was so concerned by what he saw, insisting that he doesn't know why or how it should fail in the fashion it did, so that the car goes through, is stuck, and rips the back off the front, which exposes the fuel tank and ignites the fire. But FIA Race and Safety Director Michael Masi contested that so much energy suddenly has to go somewhere, and claimed there's only so much you can do. He also said there will be no knee-jerk reaction to barrier integrity, which is why new guardrails were put in the same place for F1's second Bahrain race. However, that was followed up by the addition of 2 rows of tyres in front of the barrier as well. What other questions are there? When the chassis forced its way through the barrier, it gripped the monocoque like a clamp. With the highest percentage of the weight at the rear of the car, the midsection of the chassis simply wasn't strong enough to take the enormous forces involved, and the car split in two. But Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff suggested it did so in a peculiar or unexpected way. And Red Bull team boss Christian Horner has questioned whether the fuel cell ruptured or the presence of the lithium-ion battery played a role. So should the engine not have come apart the way it did, exposing the fuel lines and the battery within? And is that what caused the fire, something that hasn't been seen in more than 30 years? A less prominent but by no means less important question is what would have happened if Grosjean was not able to free himself from the wreckage as he did. He managed to slip out of a trapped race boot and pull himself out of the car. Whether the medical personnel on the scene could have done anything if Grosjean could not emerge from the flames on his own is a harrowing thought. So the FIA will look at the response to the fire itself. One marshal started to douse the flames in a way that helped Grosjean escape. But another was nowhere near the flames when they first started to activate their extinguisher. Plus, the fire was too ferocious for anyone to enter the flames and extract Grosjean himself if he was stuck. Presumably, the trackside workers would have had to wait until the fire was put out. So the question of what coverage could and should have been available will certainly arise. Considering these details is not a grim what if, it's essential. There is a chunk of fortune involved in that the physics and geometries of the crash were on Grosjean's side, but good fortune wouldn't have been enough without the various safety measures that came together to save Grosjean's life. So now the priority is working out what did its job well and what could have done its job better. F1's mentality of always striving to do more, especially in the interest of driver safety, will command that this is treated as a lesson to be learned from rather than a one-off fluke. What we've learned so far. The FIA Safety Department will lead the subsequent investigation, make use of all the remains from the accident, and draw input from the FIA's single-seater department, F1 itself, the teams and their technical personnel. While we're unlikely to ever be privy to that much detail and must wait a while for the findings to be made public, there is quite a lot that a trained eye can identify from the shots of the wreckage. So we've borrowed one of race-winning F1 technical director Gary Anderson's to give you exactly that. In these images, it appears the driver's right-hand side engine to chassis studs have been pulled out or failed. This first allowed the engine to bend relative to the survival cell, and then the left-hand side chassis structure failed. This then left the fuel tank fully exposed. Before the engine and gearbox separated from the survival cell, there would have been a huge compression force as the survival cell hitting the barrier wanted to stop and the weight of the engine and gearbox wanted to keep going. This probably damaged the chassis structure, and the pressure in the fuel tank and on the connectors, which in reality are not designed to withstand this, could have led to the initial fuel spillage. Remember, at this point in the race, the cars were full of fuel. Then the engine and gearbox section rotated, failing the structure around the tank. The fact that the engine and gearbox section was not far away from where the rear of the survival cell ended up just indicates that the impact forces had more or less been resolved before the rear end broke away. Taking an even closer look at the pieces that were left, we can also see the ERS battery pack housing. This unit fits into a letterbox recess underneath the fuel cell. Yes, it's separated by the floor of the chassis, but having highly volatile fuel and a 400 volt source of electrical energy that close together may now be questioned. It's also not entirely clear that the battery pack is still in the recessed section of the chassis. A damaged battery pack could very easily have ignited any spilled fuel. The bottom line is that the governing body has an awful lot of work to do to satisfy the questions and concerns raised by this crash. There's a reason F1 hasn't seen one like it in more than 30 years, and why so many elements felt like a horrible blast from the past. But that's exactly why it's concerning it was able to happen in 2020. That's an exhausting account of everything we can tell you at the moment about Grosjean's crash and the investigation into it that's already started. If you liked our explanation, please think about giving us a thumbs up, and remember to subscribe to the race if you haven't already and turn notifications on. So when there's further information about this investigation, Grosjean's accident or any of the other topics in Formula 1, you'll know exactly where to turn to.